Hey everybody, welcome back. James here again with you. And in this video, I'm going to share with you of my fixes for the POI shifting in the Venturi Avenger. Now, as you noticed in the past video I did, I turned the regulator up, and that helped with the grouping at that instance where there wasn't two different groups in the same shooting session. But as I mentioned, I kept getting a vertical shift in the groups, testing every day, literally getting multiple shifts vertically on target at the yardage I was shooting at, which was 20-25 yards. And I was seeing a huge impact shift. And again, the gun, my Venturi Avenger in 22, which this is only happening in 22 that I've noticed. A lot have commented that, again, the 25 is really not that noticeable. And I mentioned also that, obviously the weather affects the pellet flight, in which it does, but I just could not see with 100% certainty that I was getting, this huge of difference at the same aim point, and we're talking inches on impact at that close of range. That just didn't seem right and didn't settle with me. And as I've replied back to many in the comments, I went ahead and tested it all week long, like every day, morning and the hottest part of the day, which is in the afternoon here in Indiana, about 4 to 5 p.m. and right at dark, right about 9 p.m. And I've shot multiple groups every day, and I finally narrowed it down to where I'm hardly getting any POI shifting on the vertical crosshair at any given time of the day, as you can see here. So I'm going to run you down with what I did, so it helps you get to where you need to be also if you want to get the POI shifting out of your gun. Now, as I mentioned in the first video, I turned the regulator up, and that solved the POI shifting at the fill pressure of the gun. And come to find out, there's a lot more to it than that I've really caught on to. Now, with that said, why is it happening that there is a POI shifting in your air gun? Well, different pressure levels cause different things happening in your gun, and that's the short answer. The long answer is that when you filled the gun up the first time, that is totally different air than what you put in it. From the day you filled it up to the next day to the day after that, the air that is pushed into the gun is sealed. And then when you're putting different air in there, whether it's from a bottle or an air compressor, it really affects the air cylinder and the regulator, which is also related to the plenum size of the Venturi 22 caliber. Now, why I say that is the plenum size of the 22 caliber is 15 cc's, 15 cubic centimeters. And the fill volume, according to what many have said, is 180 cc's through the air cylinders. So right there shows that the plenum is 1/12 the size of the air cylinders. So 15 cc's compared to 180 there. So that's one of the reasons why you see a regulator creep in your gun, or on the gauge I should say. And there is a meaning behind that. It just doesn't happen. I went back and watched a couple of my videos that I did over the winter time, and the same thing is happening as you've seen in my past video, my recent past video, talking about the group size, and the groups change the size in the shooting cycle in that session you're doing. So the reason behind that is that inside your air cylinder, if you know a little bit about air and gases, the air doesn't mix. The hot air and the cold air does not mix. So if you leave your gun outside and get acclimated to the temperature of outside like I do before I shoot, which is a constant that I've always done, and then I fill it up with either a bottle or a air compressor, a miniature air compressor, that really puts different air in the system of your air gun, and it's either hotter or colder. And when you fill it up like that with that air from the air compressor, that's two different air types in the system. Some say molecular mass, density, you could say whatever you want. I just know that it's two different types because once I hit a certain level, the gun shifts. And not only that, I solved the issue between the shooting sessions of it, so there's no group splitting off in each other in the same time I'm shooting, but there's groups splitting off now at different pressures at different shooting times. So in the morning at 4 or 5 p.m. and in the evening, they are all not equal in the same spot on target. As you can see here. And I was aiming at the same spot. So I'm still running my regulator on the high side, which is about 2200 psi, and what is happening is when I fill up with a compressor and leave the gun set out and cool off, I'm getting a regulator creep upward because the plenum is a smaller size than the actual air cylinders. So the air inside the gun is cooling off and one section of it is heating up because it can't hold that pressure. And smaller areas that hold air are warmer. It's just a known fact. And that shows on the pressure gauge a higher pressure. Higher pressure means warmer temperature. So that's one of the reasons why you see your regulator gauge creeping, is because the air in the plenum is warmer than in the air cylinder. Now this could change too in the winter time, but as I've shown in past videos, in the winter temperatures, I'm getting the same thing happening. I was getting the same thing happening, I should say. The groups were tighter when the temperature in the gun was the same as outside versus filling it up with the warmer air and bringing the gun inside, and then it shot worse. The groups were worse. So that's the story behind it. You're mixing two different air types in the gun. So the best thing to do is to follow these steps that I'm about to share with you and how I got my gun set up the way I do now, where I'm not getting any POI shifting at all, left or right, up or down, from morning, evening, and at night. So with that said, step number one is to empty the gun fully. Degas the gun all the way out and hook it up, whether it's a bottle or air compressor, but you can't switch. So if you pick one, you can only air it up with the bottle the whole time until you empty it again. Or if you pick the compressor, always air it up with the compressor, because each of them are putting out two different air types, again, densities, whatever you want to call it, and they're separating in the air cylinders. They don't mix. So I aired the gun up with the degas screw almost all the way out so the air bleeds through the system, and then I closed it with the air compressor on and filled it up. Okay, so I have the bleed screw to the Air Venturi Avenger open. Now I'm going to tighten it up. All the air is bled out first. Now that the gun is aired up, let me show you what to do next. Now that you see on the REG here it went up to 2400 psi, and it was originally set about 2000 psi. So that's 2 tick marks once the gun got filled up, and I only filled it to about 3500 psi from 0. Now, what you have to understand is the plenum is 1/12 the size of your air cylinders in this gun, which they claim 180 cc volume, but the plenum in 22 is actually 15 cc's. So obviously a smaller area is going to show a lot more psi, which relates to a higher temperature. That's what reg creep means. On this gauge on your regulator, if that pressure shows really high compared to the regulator setting you had before, that means the temperature is different. So with the fresh fill, it shows it's increased. Now also, this will also happen when the temperature changes, when it drops. If your reg is set at a certain psi rating, so say 2000, 2100 psi, at 70 degrees temperature outside, when you reset it, and then you leave the gun outside like I do to get acclimated to the temperature, it increased again because of the air cylinder overpowering the plenum and increasing the pressure on the plenum, increasing the heat, which raised the psi. It's all a temperature relation. It's not so much a psi, you're using the psi to read, but at the same time, it's not the actual psi, it's the temperature. So all you do is just reset it. I do about 5 times, get all that hot air out of there. And you can see it'll go right back up to where it's at. Now again, this will fluctuate just barely, but it should not creep that much. And the reason why it's creeping is because the temperature is different from the plenum compared to the air cylinder. That's the main reason. And this is what causes the POI shifting downrange vertically if your gun is tuned just right. Like mine, this has been a definitely interesting testing period the past week or so, trying to figure out exactly why and what is causing the POI shifting at such a close range. And it's the temperature. And what I mean by temperature is the temperature of the air in the gun. And again, this is from just filling it with an air compressor and not a bottle. You can't mix 2 different airs, one from a compressor or one from a bottle, because if you don't know, hotter air rises and it's less dense. So that means the hotter air is at one section of your air cylinders, whereas the colder temperature air is back here if the gun was acclimated to the temperature. You can't mix 2 different air temperatures. That's why you get POI shifting, and that is why your groups get tighter at certain pressures, because you're hitting the different heat, the different temperatures in your air cylinders, the different temperature zones. Now, as you've seen there, I still had a creep from the previous time I had the regulator set about 2100 psi or so, give or take. And that's what really affects the temperature outside, is the actual setting of your regulator pressure. It's never a true setting. That's the thing. Even if it shows 2100 psi, that is at the temperature of outside. So if I did it at 70 degrees, you know, if it goes to 60 or 50 degrees, it'll go down. The actual temperature it shows will go down, but I'm still getting that creep because the other end of the cylinders are fighting the air temperatures inside the gun. So you always want your gun to be equivalent as possible. That's step number 1. So pick one, whether it's air compressor or a bottle, and stick with it unless you want to degas the gun again to not get this shifting problem. And again, I'm still running my regulator on the high side because I want the airflow to be better through the gun. And once you do that, you can either degas the gun, like open the regulator degas screw for a split second to let some air bleed out all that different air temperature and close it, or you could shoot it 5 times and be okay to get some of that air flowing through the gun. And that way the regulator needle stays about the same spot. And that'll keep you from shifting downrange. And again, I was noticing inches at 20-25 yards. It's crazy. And I'm trying to get this gun set up perfectly, which I have now for hunting season. So that's step number 1, is to get the gun filled up with the air from whatever source you pick, but you have to stick with it. And then after that, you could decide at what regulator setting you want. Now, if you want to change it lower, obviously the setting it was at when you aired it up, you're going to have to degas it again and do the process all over. But once you get it figured out exactly what setting you want, then the hammer spring comes into play, and that's what actually releases the amount of volume per shot in your Venturi Avenger and pretty much all other air guns. The hammer spring tension is what keeps the valve open longer or less, allowing more airflow or more volume of air to your projectile. And the longer the valve stays open, the more air flows through the system, so you can get rid of that hotter or different temperature air. So right now I currently have mine gun set up at 2200 psi at 4.5 turns in, which is also known as my slug tune, but I've been shooting the JSB 25 4-grain pellets in it, and it's been it's been helping so much keeping the air equal. And when I actually get the air out from either filling it up or letting the gun sit and it creeps, you have to pop off a couple shots beforehand. Either, you know, I've been doing 5 to get it back down to where I want it. 5 shots dry fired to get it down. And that's when you air it up with the source you picked. Now, if you let the gun sit outside and it creeps up a little bit, all you have to do is do about 2 or 3 shots. But you have to remember, when you're putting air in it, the gun is heating up, no matter if it is a air compressor or a bottle. Now, the bottle is not going to be as hot, obviously, because the temperature of the bottle being left outside is not going to be as hot as an air compressor, but it's still warming the gun up and changing the temperatures. And comparing the air compressor to the bottle, SCBA bottle that I use, I've noticed again that the groups are getting tighter or opening up, because the temperature of the air that's in the gun is either the same temperature of outside or it's been warmed up from the air compressor. So here's what the 5 shots look like if you don't shoot them and just get in a quick fill and you don't do any type of dry firing. It's pretty bad. It's pretty rough looking. The shots are just all over the place because they're not consistent. Whereas when you dry fire them out, you have that right there. Same point of impact where I was aiming at. So everybody, I hope this helped you with your REG creep situation and the POI issues you may have been having with the 22. Again, I've been reading the comments and noticing, you know, a lot of people have said that they've witnessed what I've talked about, and right now I've just fixed the vertical part of it. So I have no POI shifting whatsoever because I have my regulator set high and the hammer spring is allowing the air to flow through the gun. I either let the gun sit outside to get acclimated to the temperature of outside, or if I fill it up with the same source, I am not getting any POI shifting. But you have to degas the gun fully to fully reset it, and then fill it up with the source of your choosing. And you will get a creep if the gun sits out and cools off or warms up. And that is because the Plenum Size, it is obviously smaller than your air cylinders holding the air. And in the air cylinders, there is different parts of the air cylinder where the gas is either more dense or less dense, which relates to how hot that air is. And hot air rises and cold air sinks. So that means that when you're putting air in the cylinder, certain parts of the cylinder are warmer or colder than each other. And obviously, it's sitting there, just keeps compressing and compressing. And it's showing on the plenum that it's warmed up. And that's why you're getting a creep compared to the REG setting that you had prior. So everybody, I hope this video helps. And again, try this out. If you're having a vertical shift, I'm having no vertical shift, no horizontal shift from morning, from the hottest part of the day and in the evening, and I am spot on now. So the question remains though, does the weather really affect the pellet flight or projectile flight? And the answer, yes, it does to a certain extent, but it wasn't as much as I thought it was showing on paper. And there was no way that at 20-25 yards I was getting a 3 to 4 inch spread POI difference vertically. It wasn't that much. So again, guys, I appreciate you watching as always, and I hope to see you on the next one. And definitely let me know in the comments below if this video helped you out.